Good morning from Melbourne. I'm Mohammed Ibrahim, and I want to join you today during the Financial Inclusion Week 2022 with the theme of inclusive growth in digital era. What I want to talk to you today is about the financial inclusion aspects for the unbanked, underbanked, and unbankable. I guess we're all familiar with what fintech is doing to enable financial inclusion for the underbanked, but what we really don't normally focus is actually to start with unbanked and another marginalized group called the underbanked. So today, my area of interest is really to expand the discussion in the financial inclusion for this particular group, the unbankable, using Somalia as a case study. And I want to thank the Yale Group, the Yale Bank, who are supporting me in this discussion and provided some of the data and the background information. So really the theme we're taking is, yes, the unbankable, specifically in Somalia, they will be financially included with the help of the Yale technology or the app and banks who are progressive like the Real Bank in Somalia. So we'll start with financial inclusion. The definition itself, I guess, in the literature, there's so many variety of definitions about financial inclusion, but really the upshot of this whole discussion about financial inclusion is enabling people to have access to financial services, the whole spectrum of financial spectrum. But when we talk about particular groups, we normally start with the underbanked. To me, I will go one step before that. I will say the unbanked, because once you're underbanked, it assumes you already have bank account and you actually have access to a bank. But the underbanked are actually a better category compared to the unbanked, people who don't have access to bank at all. In other words, they have no reason to go to a bank because they have no interaction with the banks and so on. But the other group that I really want to include, which are really to me more important, is specifically in developing countries like Somalia, another group who are really on the margin, and we're calling them the unbankable. Why? Because they have no interest or no reason to be even involved in financial services. Why? Because they're not really in the whole scope when it comes to financial services. Now, why we're calling them unbankable, this seems to be very crude terminology, but that's really the reality, that they're really basically unbankable. And that's really what we're looking at today to say how they can be included and they can become financially included. So I guess what I want to start with is what are the what are the groups that we call the underbanked or unbanked before we even get to the unbankable. And the reason I'm showing you this photo is, and they seem to be in a way skewed towards the gender, female gender. And that's really the reality, especially in Somalia, where our focus of the discussion is. So what areas do I really want to look at are the following. I want to look at first remittance and then move into mobile money. And lately, another area that's coming into the horizon, which is the cryptos or the cryptocurrencies, and finally mention CBDCs or central bank digital currencies and what those four different areas are doing about financial inclusion for people who are unbanked or underbanked or unbankable. Again, looking specifically Somalia. So first of all, let me start with remittance and financial inclusion. This is easy because for the last 20 or 30 years, due to the diaspora, people who are living in developing countries and living in developed countries, Europe, America, or New Zealand, Australia, send a lot of money. If we take the specific case of Somalia, a lot of revenue goes to Somalia from the diaspora. So yes, in that case, it's easy to conclude that financial inclusion is enhanced by the remittance. And I'm just showing 3 or 4 papers that I will really encourage you to read if you're really interested in more about this. So this part is very easy. It's more or less accepted that remittance does help financial inclusion. But if we continue and go into mobile money and financial inclusion, the story becomes a little bit more complicated because the literature that comes from global entities like the World Bank or IMF and other institutions, it seems quickly conclude into saying, yes, mobile money seems to help financial inclusion. My study and the research I'm doing over the last 3 years seems to suggest other ideas, or although it's early days and hopefully next year we'll know more about this, it seems it's not really a final conclusion that we can say mobile money does help financial inclusion. So it's too early to say. That's really where I want to leave it today. But it's an interesting area that a lot of people are now paying attention. Again, I'm showing few papers and few resources that those who are interested can go into and read a bit more about this. So mobile money and financial inclusion, I guess the understanding is, yes, it's a step towards the positive side and the right side, but too early to come to a conclusion. If you continue, cryptos and financial inclusion is a developing story. It's a new era we're moving into. Again, I'm showing a few words that I want to share with you, basically to give some background, so some context about cryptos in general and where do they fit in the scheme of the latest developments in financial era. And I guess those words like libertarian exuberant, consumer data privacy, regulations, limited market, irreversible, all these are relevant issues. And again, I will just pick one or two of them. The reason cryptos are interesting in terms of financial inclusion, they're solving one problem that many people face when it comes to sending money home, especially the diaspora, using remittances and so on. Why? Because cryptos are, as you all know, somehow unregulated, and they can go through the systems without not restrictions. And although it's again very contentious issue when it comes to AML and KYCs and know your customer and anti-money laundering laws, a lot of people now agree that that's the way to go if we really want to enhance financial inclusion. And the last group I really want to mention, the CBDCs, or central bank digital currencies, and financial inclusion. Almost all the three areas we've mentioned so far, and now the fourth, which is CBDC, for the unbanked and underbanked and unbankable, 1.7 billion. This is a number that is more or less quoted everywhere through the World Bank and the UN agencies. Worldwide are excluded from the financial inclusion. In other words, they're not formally in the financial system. Yes, that's more or less accepted, but the question is, what can we do about it? So we talked about remittance, we talked about mobile money, and we also looked at cryptocurrency, and all of them, one way or another, seem to be helping. But this latest group, the CBDCs, or central bank digital currency, it's a kind of breaking news. It seems a lot of people are not even aware what is really the issue here. And the reason it's interesting is, as I was working on this presentation this week, in fact, the IMF and World Bank meeting that's going on, it was one of the topics discussed. What that highlights is this is no longer just a theory. In other words, it's no longer just a small story. It's really a huge story, and we have to pay a lot of attention to this. The other reason this is very interesting is it's a very political area. In other words, a lot of people have sensitivities about whether this will lead into more control in the hands of the government, so that we as citizens, we might not have more freedom in how we use our money and so on. But my area, the area I'm interested in, is really about financial inclusion. So leaving aside all the other issues about privacy and the more control for the governments and so on, and the fact that, for example, a lot of people quote China is many years ahead in this area, makes people a bit nervous. But to me, my interest is really the financial inclusion side, and in which case, if it helps, if it makes more people financially included, to me, I would say maybe it's one step forward, because at the end of the day, really, we want to allow a lot of people to have access to financial resources and to be part of the productive members of the community. So I'll leave it there as well. So to summarize my discussion, I think what I was trying to highlight is the literature looks more into the underbanked. To me, what I'm really highlighting is If you're underbanked, it means you're already banked. You already have access to a bank, but you're underbanked. You don't have some services. But there are a lot more people who are worse off, who are unbanked. They have no access to bank at all. Or in this case, what I'm really looking at is the unbankable people with no hope at all, that they might never ever get into the banking system or have access to financial services. Now, to just highlight a couple of other items here, when we talk about these groups, they're no longer really only developing countries or people under certain government regimes. Even in developed countries, Australia, New Zealand, or even in the US, you can become unbanked. And very quickly, I just want to share with you my own personal experience living in Melbourne, Australia. I became unbanked after so many years of having bank account for my business. The Commonwealth Bank of Australia closed my bank accounts for what they call risking or applying the risking policies. So it's not really only developing countries, this can happen to anyone. So in my case, we're still going through trying to figure out what to do, but so far, not like even the ombudsman or the government involvement, still the Commonwealth is saying they're too big to do whatever they want to do. So it's not really only developing countries or poor people, but it can happen in other countries as well. In the US, we know cases where during the COVID crisis, when people were given money to help, some people couldn't cash those checks. Why? Because they're also unbanked. So I just want to show that it's really not an area that's exclusive only to developing countries or poor countries. It can happen everywhere. Now, with that, I want to really leave with you a couple of other thoughts. Since now we talked about what the issues are, what can we do? I guess it's easy to highlight problems, but sometimes we forget to give suggestions and the way forward. So there are a lot of, again, people working in this area. I just want to mention the ITU, for example, and the GSMA and others who are trying to do something about financial inclusion. And this is just to give you pointers. And some banks also in some developing countries, in this case Somalia with the Real Bank, they're also trying to help, and they somehow so far they seem to be winning to get more people to become banked. Now, what other suggestions can we provide the way forward? The need for collaboration between governments and banks and financial institutions. I'm talking about now developing countries like Somalia, and empowering startups, people who are trying to help in developing countries. To encourage sanity in government policies. In some countries, it seems to be very complicated to do something about financial inclusion. So there's a need for having some sanity in this area and coming up with some good ideas to allow people to become financially included. Now, all these groups, as I mentioned before, the ITU, the UBU, the World Bank, Better Than Cash, Alliance for Financial Inclusion, even GSMA, they all seem to be doing different things, and they're all trying to do the right thing and the good thing. So my comment is a way of having some constructive collaboration, focusing all our resources to achieve better financial inclusion, empowering startups globally, and also encouraging equitable government policies. What I really mean by that is to rein in to people who abuse their power like banks and say, look, you really can't do this. You have to allow people to all be financially included. With that, I'll stop here, and your feedback is welcome. I want to acknowledge people who helped me with this, my supervisors, Jason Sargent and Paul Seifert at Swinburne University, Hamid from the Yale Bank, and many, many others who I'll email them or will decided to remain anonymous. More about me, please go into those links. I'll leave you with that, and any comments, feedback, welcome. Thank you very much. Until next year, Financial Inclusion Week. Thank you, and it's been nice talking to you. Thank you very much.